morning, everybody. Good evening, good afternoon from wherever you are. We are ready to start the webinar on the joint GEF UNDP evaluation of the Small Grants Program. My name is Carlo Carugi. I'm a senior evaluation officer in the GEF Independent Evaluation Office, and I'm here with Heather Bryant, who is evaluation advisor from the UNDP Independent Evaluation Office. Heather and I have collaborated in doing this joint evaluation, representing the two offices. We are also here with Ksenia Temienko from the GEF Independent Evaluation Office. She is a Knowledge Management Officer. And with Clemencia Vela, who is was part of the team in the evaluation, and she conducted two case studies, one in Peru and one in Ecuador. The presentation today is going to be, we can switch on the slides. It's going to show, can we advance the slides? How do we do that? There you go. Okay, this is an overview of the presentation. So basically, thank you. Basically, we are going to go through the scope of the evaluation, what we evaluated, how we did it, which methods we used, what we found, our conclusions, and the way forward. So, in terms of what we evaluated, it's important to say that this evaluation was done for two purposes. In 2007-2008, there was another important joint evaluation of the Small Grants Program, and it was again joint between the two offices of UNDP and the GEF Independent Evaluation Offices. And that evaluation was crucial in shaping the way forward for the SGP. So this time around, we thought we would do a follow-up of the application of the recommendations that were produced by that important evaluation. Can you mute, please?
I'm trying to.
Okay. Okay, so we did hear a lot of background noise. Probably if you could mute your microphone, that would allow the presentation to go smoother. Thank you very much. So, as I said, the second purpose of the evaluation was also to assess the SGP current role and extent to which the SGP has effectively contributed to achieving global environmental benefits while addressing livelihoods, poverty, and gender. We also looked at the broader adoption of the SGP in terms of higher than grant level results, and I will explain more about that later, and on efficiency issues, in particularly monitoring and evaluation. So, in terms of method use, this was a particularly method-rich evaluation. We applied the mixed method approach, and we had 12 country case studies, including interviews, focus groups, meetings, and project visits in the field to 144 grant projects. And we had a very huge effort in an online survey, which reached out to 114 country programs and contacted more than 2,500 respondents, of which we had a response rate of 48%, so rather high. And we did an extensive review of documents and conducted interviews at the central level in Washington. So particularly we are method rich, and we are pretty happy about the way we have done it. What we found, in terms of environmental benefits, we found that the GEF SGP is doing well. Couple of data, 77% of the total of the grant projects assessed is in the high satisfactory range, and this was compounded by other anecdotal evidence that came out from interviews, desk review, and other sources of information. So basically this is a very positive finding already. So let me pass over to my colleague Heather for the livelihood gender aspects of what we found.
Good morning, everyone. With respect to livelihoods, evidence gathered during the evaluation suggests that SGP has given significant attention to community-level benefits and livelihoods, and this attention is yielding positive results. The evaluation team assessed the design and the actual results of 115 projects implemented in 8 countries in terms of their contributions to community livelihoods. 38% of these projects explicitly targeted poor, marginal, or vulnerable communities. And overall, 85% of the sampled projects contributed some way in improving community livelihoods. There? No. Which button is it? Okay. Apologies for the technical problems. In addition to strengthening livelihoods, since 2006, in line with evolving GEF and UNDP policies, the SGP has undertaken several steps to promote gender mainstreaming and women's empowerment. During the evaluation, we found that national SGP stakeholders generally believe that attention to gender and to women's empowerment has strengthened the country's ability to meet its environmental objectives. Actual results of projects on the ground in terms of promoting gender equality are evident. 103 grant projects were assessed with respect to gender, and more than half were found to have benefited women and men equally, or to have disproportionately benefited women. Which button? The evaluation found no evidence, no perceptions that there's a trade-off between the SGP's gender and global environmental objectives.
Okay, taking over a broader adoption, this concept which is there to mean that grant level results are actually contributed to a higher than grant level outcome and potentially impact. So the first thing to say is that the SGP is not expected formally to have higher than grant level effectiveness. So there's no obligation for it. But as this is a focus of the work of the GEF independent evaluation since in the last 4 years, I would say, we took the opportunity to look into this aspect because with a formative approach, in sense to try to learn whether this broader adoption happens in the framework of the SGP. And as a matter of fact, we observe that a lot happens in terms of broader adoption. So before getting to the results, let me go through the 4 main mechanisms through which broader adoption is supposed to happen. First of all, the replication of grant level results in other places, but also scaling up, which means from the grant level making it to a higher scale kind of initiative, mainstreaming of policies and so on, and market change. So grant level results contribute to change in the market of the environmental goods and services. So, as I said, initial findings that we have in this evaluation suggest that much has been achieved in terms of broader adoption in the SGP. From the survey, all the respondents from 114 countries were aware of example of broader adoption from the SGP grants in their country. So we ourselves verified that in all the 12 country studies. In the online survey, it was interesting to find that there were mixed views on whether broader adoption should be formally a target of the SGP as a program from local level to global environmental benefits, but also most felt that expectations for broader adoption should not be high. We also explored the factors that, contribute to broader adoption, and our findings are that contributing factors are the efforts of the national coordinators and to a certain extent also all of the small grants program national steering committees. The capacity of selected grantees has been a mixed factor. Some interviewees and some on the online survey said that it is a contributing factor, or and others said it is a limiting factor. So it's kind of mixed. In short, broader adoption certainly happens, and particularly in the form of replication of the same grant in other places, or upscaling, but all the time at the local scales. So the SGP deserves recognition for its contribution to results that extend beyond the project level. An important area of research of this evaluation was the upgrading. The upgrading was a major policy that was introduced as a result of the the 2008 joint evaluation, and basically the matter is the core of the upgrading policy is that the SGP would move from accessing only core funds to progressively upgrade to be executed as a normal GEF full-size project and access the resources allocated by the GEF to countries. So we looked into whether this upgrading that was introduced as a result of the previous joint evaluation, how did it work? And we found that it worked overall well, but with positive and negative aspects. So some of these relate to the complexity of developing a full-size project, which led to delays and transaction costs. But we have also to take into consideration that going into the full-size project modality ensures a higher level of funding for the SGP. So these are just a few of the factors. It's interesting to note that the capacity of the selected grants, again, has been seen as both as a hindering and a contributing factor. But, sorry, this is wrong. Okay. Okay, well, okay, in short, I mean, I was on the wrong side of the presentation, I'm sorry. In short, it was noted that the reduced time and the pressure to reach endpoints would mean less time for learning and adaptive managing when you are in an upgraded situation executed as an SGP. And that without timely planning and resources, there might be gaps in transitioning from one phase to another in the funding cycle of the SGP. And
please disable your microphone.
Okay. Can you please disable your microphone? It's very noisy here. Thank you. An important aspect of our research on the upgrading policy was the criteria that make such that country programs are selected to be upgraded from the standard SGP modality to a full-size project modality. And the rules, as they are now, say that the upgrading is based on two basic criteria, program age and program size, in terms of cumulative grants. What we found is that, again, through online surveys and interviews and country visit, triangulated with country visit information, is that country stakeholders don't believe that these are the most important factor in deciding whether a country program is mature enough to upgrade to a full-size project. As you can see from the graph here, the main factor is the capacity for co-financing leverage in a given country, the strength of the civil society, the the amount and quality and type of partnership that the country program is able to establish, and the number of grants delivered and the age of the size of the country program is, as you can see, it comes down the scale in terms of importance. Back to you, Heather, for the vision.
Thank you, Carlo. The evaluation also looked at the overall vision for the small grants program and found that there's an inherent mix of expectations for the SGP And this results in a need to continually manage the demands and the tensions that arise. And one such issue is the balance between the environment and other aspects of development. The evaluation found that at the global level, perceptions of this balance has shifted over time. And for example, the GEF Secretariat is concerned that there may be a need to refocus the SGP on its original raison d'etre, that is, the global environmental benefits, as SGP has shown an increasing emphasis on livelihoods. At the national level, planners and managers have a mix of priorities, and we see in the SGP country program strategy documents a fairly balanced distribution of interests from the global environment to the local environment to community empowerment to poverty and livelihoods and to gender issues. And at the grassroots level, for many stakeholders, the priority is on generating local benefits in terms of livelihoods, although the environment definitely does feature. Given SGP's unique position in linking environmental benefits and community development aspirations, there is an inevitable mix of expectations, and this thus requires clarity of vision. Another example of differing expectations with respect to the SGP is broader adoption. On the one hand, as Carlo has already explained and as outlined in the GEF theory of change framework, broader adoption of GEF outcomes is critical if the GEF is to achieve global environmental benefits in the long run. On the other hand, the SGP, given its nature and its local scale of operations, should not necessarily be expected to achieve broader adoption. And we found that some of the SGP documents do refer to broader adoption processes, and the CPMT also feels pressure to achieve broader adoption. Yet, throughout the evaluation, many stakeholders emphasized that while broader adoption is indeed occurring and it is positive, higher expectations should not be placed on the SGP. A third area in where there are different expectations is with respect to SGP's role and purpose. Stakeholders question whether the SGP is a program, a GEF modality, or a delivery mechanism, and these perceptions have implications on issues such as funding and resource mobilization, and on what the SGP should ultimately aim to achieve. And finally, as we all know, the context in which the SGP operates has changed considerably since the program was created in 1992. This is true both globally and in most program countries. Just as an example, the global financing situation has changed, with many, especially with regard to climate change, where there are now many large sources of funds outside of the GEF. And the internal situation in program countries has also evolved, with many program countries having made excellent economic progress and progress towards or achievement of the Millennium Development Goals. And thus, in response, the SGP has had to evolve over time. The evaluation also noted that a global SGP steering committee was established in 2006 to provide overall strategic guidance to the SGP. However, it met only 3 times, with the most recent meeting in 2010. The last set of findings we would like to highlight this morning relate to monitoring and evaluation. The evaluation found that significant resources and efforts have been devoted to improving SGP's monitoring system. We found that at the project level, a great deal of monitoring activity has taken place, although coverage is not universal. Of the 144 projects reviewed for the evaluation, 92% of the projects included monitoring activities in the project design, and 89% had established at least some results indicators as part of the design. However, let me back up. A large percentage of the projects, 88%, had also received at least one monitoring visit from the national coordinator or a representative during the course of implementation. And here we noticed some differences with respect to the 2008 joint evaluation. The 2008 evaluation found that half of the projects they sampled benefited from 3 or more visits from the national coordinator or a representative, whereas the present evaluation found that 1/3 of the project received 3 or more visits. And interviews at the country level suggest that resource constraints, including practical issues such as no longer having a dedicated...
Listen, mine is plain, listen.
Could you mute your mic, please?
Could you mute your mic, please? The question and answer session will follow. We are almost through the presentation. So please bear with us for another 5 minutes.
As I was saying, interviews at the country level suggest that resource constraints, such as no longer having a dedicated project vehicle and driver, have resulted in fewer field visits than in the past. We also noted that a number of characteristics of the SGP make monitoring challenging. First of all, the SGP is designed to be demand-driven by communities, and that makes it difficult at the outset of a country program to establish indicators, baselines, and targets. And the unit of analysis is naturally the project grant, of which there is a vast number of many different types and with many different intended local level results. Each project may have multiple objectives, and developing indicators and baselines and tracking data against these targets may be beyond the capacity of many grantees. The results framework in global SGP program documents include indicators and require the aggregation of results of project grants across all countries. While this is necessary, this can also only capture selected quantitative measures, which only provides a partial picture of SGP's results. Furthermore, SGP pilots new ideas, innovates, and contributes to knowledge about what works and what does not work in different contexts. Seeking to measure only results overlooks this characteristic and could even discourage innovation and risk-taking. Thus, most stakeholders agree that further progress is required on monitoring and evaluation of the SGP. It's generally accepted that the demands placed on the current M&E system are ambitious and unrealistic, and that new, innovative, and practical approaches need to be developed.
Okay, based on the analysis and the findings that we have just presented, the evaluation came up with a set of conclusions and recommendations. We have 5 conclusions and 4 recommendations, and try to go through them, skim them quickly to allow time for discussion. However, it's important to notice that these conclusions and recommendations are focused on central level issues and are primarily aimed at central level decision makers and managers. So first of all, good news is that in the last 8 years, the SGP has done and is doing great. The SGP continues to support communities with projects that are effective, efficient, and relevant in achieving global environmental benefits while addressing livelihood and gender and poverty and empowering women. So the good news is also that some form of broader adoption, is particularly in terms of replication and scaling up, is occurring. The second conclusion is that the SGP is also has grown up, in a sense, if we allow me this term, along these years, and the introduction of the upgrading and related policies contributed to the evolution of the SGP by setting out expectations for country programs and their development over time. The new policies have resulted in increased resources, in more funding for the SGP, but they also have brought challenges. And it's important to bear in mind that the current criteria for selecting countries for upgrading to full-size projects are not optimal. Conclusion 3, the SGP is under pressure for different sides. In a sense, as a global program acting nationally and locally and being grassroots-driven, the SGP must align to GEF, UNDP, national and local priorities. Each of them are different. Within this context, the SGP has remained coherent while staying flexible, but however, different perspectives and changing contexts create tensions. And the most important thing is that the global and long-term vision of the SGP has not been updated to reflect this situation. Conclusion number 4, this is about the way the SGP is managed and the governance system of the SGP. Basically, the conclusion is that the SGP government and management structures have been adequate over time, but are increasingly strained by an ever rapidly changing context. And the GEF corporate nature of the SGP and the role of value of the added of the UNDP as a GEF agency are not clearly articulated. And the conclusion 5 is about M&E, an important aspect of this evaluation and of an important function in the SGP. Despite important progress, which we could observe in this evaluation, the M&E does not adequately support decision-making and remains too complex.
The evaluation then makes a set of recommendations to the GEF, to UNDP, and to the Central Program Management Team. And an evaluation management response was prepared jointly by the GEF Secretariat and the UNDP GEF unit in UNDP's Bureau for Policy and Program Support. The first recommendation is addressed to the GEF, and the recommendation is to revitalize the SGP Steering Committee, that is the Global Steering Committee, to support high-level strategic thinking in developing a long-term vision for the SGP, to foster dialogue between UNDP and the GEF, and to advise the Council as appropriate on strategic decision-making. The GEF-UNDP management response indicates support of the recommendation and states that the process of revitalizing the steering committee has been initiated. The second recommendation, which is addressed to the GEF and to UNDP, is to continue upgrading, building on strengths, while addressing the weaknesses identified. The criteria for selection of countries for upgrading should be revisited. The management response indicates that UNDP and the CPMT, in consultation with the GEF Secretariat, will continue to refine the operationalization of the upgrading policy. And the final recommendation, which is addressed to UNDP and to the CPMT, is to continue efforts to improve M&E, designing more streamlined and useful M&E tools and activities that balance the need to measure with the need to provide support to local communities in tackling environmental issues. According to the evaluation management response, the CPMT, together with the UNDP GEF Global Coordinator of the Upgrading Country Programs, had already held a series of technical meetings aimed at designing and instituting a more effective M&E system. According to the management response, much progress has been made towards developing a more practical monitoring function.
Thank you, Heather. So the Q&A session follows now. I keep the screen on this slide because there you will find the web links to the evaluation reports. Basically, you have a full report in English and 3 summary reports, 20 pages in information graphic format in English, French, and Spanish, and they are available on both websites of the UNDP and the GEF independent evaluation offices. For the question and reflection, what I would like to suggest is, first of all, when you speak, you can identify yourself to allow us to know who's talking. And my suggestion is also to try to hear from you, okay, if there are questions on what we have done in the evaluation. But, you know, we have to keep in mind the evaluation is done. There is a management response. Action is already ongoing. So we are really doing this dissemination seminars to foster further discussion, and we want to further use the evaluation in terms of what can be taken away from it at your level, at the country level especially. So, having said that, I would like to open the question and reflection session right now. So if there are interventions, please raise your hand, make yourself visible, identify yourself, and ask.
You can also ask questions through the chat room.
Yes, please.
Hi, good morning. Are you hearing me?
Yes, very well. Who are you?
This is Rosemary Lal. I'm the Program Officer for Energy, Environment, and Disaster Management in the UNDP Trinidad and Tobago office.
Okay, nice to meet you, Rosalind.
Rosemary.
Rosemary, sorry, Rosemary.
So good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for that presentation. I'm afraid we didn't, I couldn't get my audio to work for the first few slides, but from what I saw, it was quite a comprehensive evaluation. The question that I would have is more from the perspective of upgrading GEF SGP, because we are currently trying to find a way to link the UNDP Environment and Energy Program to the GEF SGP program that we have in-house as well. It continues to be a bit of a challenge. So you mentioned an upgrading policy of some type. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that component of your evaluation, the upgrading aspect of it, and what your findings were?
Okay. Well, thank you for the question. Before going on, we take a series of questions. So this is number 1. What is number 2? Anything in the chat?
Zlatko here. Zlatko.
Yes? Can you repeat your name and function?
Yes. Thank you for this webinar. I'm Zlatko Samardzic from Macedonia, National Coordinator of the Small Grants Program in Republic of Macedonia.
Okay, nice to meet you, Glasgow.
Thank you very much for what have you done. It's really clear and understandable, so easy to follow also. I would agree. I have no question. Maybe this will help to set up more adequate monitoring and evaluation, that the results will be usable. I mean, strictly and only after the closing of the projects, because during the projects, the grantees and we are obliged to do monitoring and evaluation according to the design results and indicators that are agreed upon. They're not something that we can fly and then said we cannot fly, but which are really reasonable, and afterwards that we can see them within a few months. But what happens that there should be, and please help us in future, that to find out somehow how we can see whether those results can be measured after certain period of time, let's say a year or 2 years after the project closes, because they can be used as and they should be used to upscale or to replicate. Otherwise, it's just that we successfully spent some money. We were all happy during the project implementation, and also according to administratively, after the closing of Memorandum of Agreement and the project, there is no obligation whatsoever between the two parties, being SGP and the grantees. Thank you very much.
So if I summarize what you're saying, you're asking about the many indicators, how to measure 2-3 years after the project end. Is that the nuts of your the nature of your question?
Correct. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Glasgow. So any other questions?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes?
Yeah, good morning. My name is Margaret Jones-Williams from UNDP Country Office in Lao PDR.
Good afternoon, Margaret.
Yes, it's nighttime here in Lao PDR.
Good evening.
Yes, thank you. I had a little difficulty with the transmission, so I actually have 2 questions. One for clarification, and just to clarify the recommendation. One was on the potential upscaling of projects. I wasn't clear on what the findings of the evaluation were on that and the recommendation. And then I believe it was recommendation number 4. As I said, I lost a bit of the audio. on the clarity of the role of UNDP. Could you just go over that again for me, and if there was a specific recommendation on that?
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm Pamela from Mauritius.
Yes.
Hello? Yes, I'm
Hello,
Pamela from Mauritius.
Pamela.
Sorry, my connection is out. Sorry, this is Margaret. Was there an answer? I'm sorry, I lost the audio again. Was there an answer?
No, not yet. We are just taking the questions, and your question is a clarification of recommendation number 4 as far as upscaling is concerned, and the other one is about clarity of UNDP's role. Is that correct?
Correct. Correct. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Margaret. We'll come back to you in a moment. We have Pamela from
Mauritius. Mauritius.
Pamela. Hi, Pamela.
Good evening. Hi, I'm the National Coordinator for the Small Grants Program in Mauritius. And of course, Mauritius being a small island developing state, I'm very much interested in your findings with regard to SIDS. Of course, I did read your evaluation some time back when the global manager shared it with us. But I find this webinar very interesting because we have the opportunity to listen to you directly and to meet with you directly. So could you please elaborate a little bit on your findings with regards to SIDS? SGP SIDS.
Okay. Any differentiation feature out of the SIDS evidence that we could eventually find? Okay. All right. Thank you. Any other questions queuing up in line? Anything from the chat?
Should we maybe try and respond to this round?
We can try to start and respond to this round. So the first question from Rosemary from Trinidad and Tobago, UNDP, is about
upgrading.
The upgrading. Let me find it. Okay, so the upgrading was. Let me try to give a little bit more elements. Upgrading was a major reform in the SGP, and it was first of all introduced for a very precise reason, and this was just before the first joint evaluation of the SGP. At that time, the policy was called graduation, and the idea was that once the country graduates, the country program, then it would not continue to be funded by the GEF, because the idea was to give opportunities to other countries to go through the SGP experience. This was one of the aspects that were challenged very much by the evaluation in 2008. And as a matter of fact, the graduation policy was translated in upgrading policy, and the idea was, yes, okay, but you move from being funded and to operate on a yearly basis with dedicated funding through what we call the GF core resources to use the official funding given to the country by the GF, and be executed with STAR resources. At the time was the RAF resources, the resource allocation framework to the system, to resources of GEF to the country, and then STAR in GEF 5, sorry. So a major reform that has a lot of implications. So the first 10 countries that now one of them has withdrawn, Chile, that have gone through this experience, constitute for us an excellent window to observe what are the good and the bads of this whole process, which has been so central and so crucial to the evolution in the history of the SGP. And And of course, I mean, as any major reform, first of all, it took time to be put in practice, and this is what we call, it had teething problems in a sense, no? And it brought in complexity. The major messages are that it brought the upgrading brought more funding for the SGP. Those 9 country programs have had full-size projects for the SGP up to $5 million each, $5 million, so quite substantial. But it also brought in more complexities, delays, increase in transaction costs, demands on the design at the country level of the monitoring and evaluation system, and the demands also for longer time period planning, but at the same time, security over the funding over more than 1 year, while the core resources, the SGP functioning on core resources, basically function on a yearly basis. So these are the main findings of this area of the research of the evaluation, which translated in the recommendation about continuing with the upgrading, but trying to work on the good aspects of it and mitigate the bads. And in the recommendation also we provide some suggestions, some specific suggestions as far as mitigating the bads and working on and building on the good aspects are concerned. So I hope I gave enough elements of response on this. And I pass over to Heather for the question of the monitoring and evaluation indicators after 2-3 years.
Yes, from our colleague from Macedonia. I think at the beginning of your intervention you said you didn't so much have a question as a comment, so I'll take it more as a comment. And I would say that, first I would say that that was actually what was fascinating about doing this evaluation, is we had the opportunity to go visit projects. Some were still under implementation, but we specifically made an effort to visit older projects that had been completed and to actually see what remained, and that's what helped us judge the questions of sustainability and also look at the potential for replication or broader adoption. So all I can say is that I support your idea of finding ways and mechanisms to continue the monitoring even after the closure of a project. And I do think that's the beauty of the SGP, which as a country program, there must be opportunities to incorporate that kind of follow-up visit to continue the reflections at the program level. I don't know if that really responds fully to your query. Do you have anything else to add on that, Carlo?
No, not really. I think that the issue of the 2 years after is also a matter of having the funding that you need to have, which is practical, very practical at the national level. National coordinators are already strained with the resources that they are given and for executing this crucial task. So it's going to be even more challenging to go after 2-3 years to grantees and see what is there. But you know, that's also why we do evaluations like ours. I mean, every now and then, to try to capture that level of results and efficiency. So to do it systematically in each and every grant would be an enormous task, and it's completely unrealistic to think about it, in my opinion.
And
sorry, we have a comment from Tehmina Akhtar about what you're saying. Yeah, so it's just so comment on what Carlo is saying on upgrading. The STAR endorsement for SGP, upgraded countries have gone down significantly on OP6 on average, from 4 million to around 2.5 million.
Well, thank you, Temina. That's a very useful suggestion, and we'll probably come back to it to the next joint evaluation. But it's interesting to know. Thanks for this. Thank you very, very much. Okay.
No.
You take the next one?
I would just add on the monitoring. What we did see in several countries is a move towards geographic targeting or focusing programs in selected areas of the country. And one advantage of doing so would be over time it might facilitate this follow-up monitoring. If implementation is going on in neighboring communities, it would be easier and not necessarily extremely costly to add on follow-on visits to older projects. But moving on to the question where the transmission wasn't clear on the recommendations regarding to upscaling and the role of UNDP, I'm not sure if on the upscaling it was the recommendation related to upgrading, which perhaps Carlo has already answered indirectly in his intervention.
So. I think so, yeah.
Because basically the recommendation with respect to upgrading is that the program as a whole should continue with the upgrading, building on the strengths and addressing the weaknesses, so that while it should continue, there's maybe a need to look at some of the specifics of the modality. And secondly, on the role of UNDP, I think maybe you've read the report and noticed that we actually skipped over one of the recommendations, which is a very specific recommendation to UNDP at the central level about ensuring that SGP is implemented under a single coherent global program framework. And we also do mention in the report or recommend that UNDP corporate should provide guidance to SGP and to UNDP resident representatives to strengthen synergies between SGP and UNDP programming at the country level, all the while recognizing the peculiarities of the SGP as a GEF corporate program. So the full report does address the question of the role of UNDP, but we did sort of gloss over it in the presentation in the interest of time.
Thank you, Heather. On the question on whether there is anything specific that relates to seeds, well, the answer is that this was not in the scope of the evaluation to look specifically what were the results in the seeds. So the seeds was not looked at specifically. But what I can say is that my office has done a very important amount of country portfolio evaluations, in which we looked at each and every dollar spent by the GEF in a given country, and we have quite a substantial amount of coverage of SGP in the seeds, of the seeds first of all, but and the SGP within the country portfolio evaluation work. So those country portfolio evaluations, together with the UNDP assessment of development results, which is their country portfolio evaluation modality, have all been meta-analyzed in this evaluation, and there's nothing specifically that shout out from this piece of analysis that alerted us or brought us to speak to specifically in terms of conclusions to the SGP in terms or even in terms of recommendations. From the work of the country portfolio evaluation, what I can say, in my office, we produced the important recommendation in the seeds. I remember the OECS, the Caribbean country cluster portfolio evaluations, where the SGP there is executed regionally, and we supported that. But we also found out that, I mean, of course, obviously, to execute small grants program modality support in such places which are already characterized by very high transaction cost, it's challenging, because the small grants programs are typically high in transaction cost. So as a job support modality is expensive, and working in seeds is expensive. So this has to be borne in mind, and this is also working in a regional kind of modality mitigates such costs. So that's what I can say for seeds. But no, there's nothing specific out of this specific effort in terms of takeaways or messages for the seeds region in the world. So this is the first round of questions. We are happy. We still have 10 minutes for any other questions that might come up.
Hello, good morning. Can you hear me? This is Giles Romulus from St. Lucia in the Caribbean, National Coordinator for St. Lucia.
Hi, how are you?
It's good morning here. It's 10:51 a.m. Thank you for the excellent presentation and clarification. You mentioned during the early presentation a tension that you had observed between the environment and livelihoods. And that tension, you didn't elaborate enough, in my opinion. What were these tensions, and were you finding projects that were so heavily emphasized on livelihoods and you could not discern the environmental impacts and benefits? Or what precisely were those tensions, and what do you think can be done to resolve them? It seems to me that the philosophy of the GEF is to promote projects that have significant environmental impacts. And out of the process of those implementing these projects, you can have livelihoods emerging from them. In other words, articulating a process in which the environment is the core, the center, and perhaps even the framework for projects to evolve. Tell us specifically what these tensions are and what you recommend, or what are your recommendations for resolving those tensions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Giles.
Thank you very much for the question. In fact, I think you've answered your own question to a certain extent. But what we meant by this tension is how to balance it, that often the demands coming up from the community level are more livelihoods focused. Their immediate concerns are their means of subsistence. And then, of course, at the corporate level, particularly from the GEF side, there is this, the whole objective is the contribution to global environmental benefits. Then we have UNDP, the implementing agency, whose overarching goal is, in fact, poverty reduction, but which includes environmental sustainability. And so what we found is at all levels, individuals have their own views on this, and what we believe is that there's a need for continual dialogue to manage these, what we call tensions. Part of the reason we recommend revitalizing the Global Steering Committee to provide really this high-level guidance, and then at each level. What was I going to add? In terms of what we saw on the ground, we did see a little bit of everything, and we also saw that the national coordinators play an extremely important role in mediating between these goals. If the demands coming from the community are perhaps more focused on livelihoods, the national coordinator, assisted by the National Steering Committee, were making efforts to identify how this actually was important for the environment and for global benefits, and how to adjust the project to ensure that all of these dimensions were being met. And I don't know if we could invite Clemencia to speak on this, because she also visited two different countries and a large number of projects and has some insights into this.
Yeah, you can speak. You will be heard.
Okay, good morning. Yes, it was very interesting to see the differences regarding to tensions. In fact, in some countries, you could find that there was a good comprehension of the communities of what the global environment was important for. For instance, regarding climate change, if the communities could link their job with or to understand the concepts, the global concepts, as how the climate is affecting their own livelihood, they could easily work towards helping it. In other words, if, for example, they were growing crops that they didn't have a commercial value, but they would understand that many of them are disappearing, and that maybe they wouldn't have any way food for themselves, and they would understand that maybe some seeds they could find in nearby protected areas, then they were more willing to protect them. So when, in other words, or in summary, when the communities could understand the purpose of protecting things that are beyond their direct site of living, then they were more open to collaborate in regards to conservation, for instance, and the long-term things.
Thank you, Clemencia. I think these elements of response, I hope they are sufficient and clear enough. We still have 5 minutes. Any other questions to take advantage of the remaining time for this webinar? Anything on the chat? Again, I call the attention to the fact that the reports are available, and the short report is a very quick read, and it's available in the 3 languages, and it's full of graphs and data, so we hope that it can be read and used at any level. We did a huge effort in that sense, and I hope we managed to get what we wanted. So no other questions from the audience, from the present people? Anything on the chat again? So if there are no other questions, I would like to thank everybody for the participation. I hope you found this webinar useful. We are going to have the same webinar in this